timing or for connectivity or whatever that may be. So we do put all of these seminars on YouTube, and you can reach that through our website, zimscb.org, if you missed any of the past seminars. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and do the intro. So first of all, welcome from our team. So the team for the past few months has been MX, Nobusutu, myself, and Tim. And we are the committee of SCB Zim. And if you've attended any of the previous seminars, you'll know that we've been on the hunt for some new committee members. So we're really delighted to welcome Rachel Chiwara and Merlin Nkomo. And Rachel and Merlin, I'm not sure if you've been able to join. I think Merlin's there, to maybe pop on and give us a wave if you have access to video. If not, that's okay. Ah, there she is. Brilliant. Hi, Merlin. Brilliant. That's great. We're really excited. Literally brand new committee members in the last day or two. So very excited to get their input as we move forward. So just a quick update. We are currently finalizing the strategy based on the member survey. So we will hopefully share that with you next time. We're all volunteers, so things take a little bit longer than they might do otherwise, but we're very excited about it. If you are interested in being a part of our community, please sign up on our website. We can pop that into the chat. If you're not already a member of the Global SCB, please do consider joining. There's a variety of different benefits. And just to say, the current projects that we're actively working on are a resource library, a horizon scan, and our ongoing blog and seminar series. I'm not going to go into great depth on them now. Please feel free to email us or chat with us in the chat of this to learn more. In particular on the blog, if you are interested in sharing any part of your work that's related to Zimbabwean conservation, please feel free to email Tim, who coordinates our blogs. We'd love to hear from you. Our most recent one was all about human-lion conflict in the Wangi landscape. Very, very interesting from Leo. But we'd love to hear about your work anywhere to do with Zimbabwean conservation. So please go ahead and email Tim if you'd like to contribute something. Also to let you know that the SCB's global conference, which is the International Congress of Conservation Biology, is now completely online, which makes it much more accessible to all of us. So please go ahead and have a look at the website, see if there's something that interests you, and sign up. And we'd love to have you there. So now I'd love to hand over to Eva. I'm going to stop screen sharing. Eva has been at the forefront in Zimbabwe over the last few years of really transforming how the law can be a tool in wildlife conservation. I think we all acknowledge that we have a very strong regulatory framework in Zimbabwe, but Eva and her organization Speak Out for Animals have been sort of at the forefront of creating that enabling environment around the regulatory framework, making the changes that need to be made, undertaking the trainings that need to happen to make sure that all the different parts of our legal system are well equipped to do everything that can be done within that regulatory framework for wildlife. And we're really excited. We've had a huge variety of different speakers so far on our seminar series. So it's quite cool to have this aspect of wildlife conservation, which is often kind of ignored by those of us who, you know, prefer to worry about ecology and what's actually happening in the bush. What happens in courtrooms in towns all over Zimbabwe is equally, if not more important. So really delighted to welcome you, Eva, and happy to hand over. So I didn't give you a bio. You're welcome to sort of give your CV if you'd like, but we're delighted to hear from you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity and everybody who's part of the conversation today. My name is Eva Chinoda. I've been a lawyer for 11 years, but I'm the founder of a national organization registered in Zimbabwe, Zambia, Namibia, and US called Speak Out for Animals. Speak Out for Animals is primarily an organization primarily comprised of lawyers that are dedicated to protecting animals through the legal system. So today I will talk about the law and conservation in Zimbabwe in particular, because I feel that the law plays a very important role in supporting and complementing the different institutions and organizations that are working so hard to protect wildlife in Zimbabwe. So allow me to just share my screen. So I assume that we're a group of mixed people, and I'll just touch the basics of what law is all about, its purpose and its integration into the conservation field. So when we talk about law, we are talking about rules and the regulatory frameworks, the policies that govern a particular society. And putting it in context of our discussion today, we're talking about the rules and regulations that prevent environmental misnomers like pollution or extinction of animals or harm to biodiversity, to just name a few. The law obviously is there to regulate behaviors of human beings and also to give structure to business practices, to define what is wrong or what is good in a society's circumstances. I think it's important for you to really take note that laws are specific to each and every country, to each and every jurisdiction. And what might be legal in one country might not be legal in another country. And that is one of the things that I'm going to talk about, trying to talk a little bit about the morality of certain activities that are done promoting conservation in Zimbabwe, and also the legality of certain activities that are done to promote conservation in Zimbabwe. And I would also just like to mention that laws obviously establish standards and individual responsibilities. They also establish standards and responsibilities even to institutions that have been given mandates to look after wildlife or to conserve wildlife. And most importantly, the law is there to maintain order and protect individual rights and liberties. Let's see. Okay, so in context, the role of the law in wildlife conservation, number one, is to ensure or to make sure that there's adequate order. Number two, to provide conflict, whether it's human-wildlife conflict between different industries that also want to benefit from the same land, air, and water. And then the other role of the law is to incentivize behavior change through cohesion and sanctions, and then also to preserve the environment and future generation. I think this is one of the most important things that the law does in as far as contributing to conservation is concerned. It also establishes legitimate authority. It gives mandates, abilities, and obligations to certain authorities and defines their powers and also what they need to do. And then lastly, but not least, they also provide a safe haven for wildlife. So I'll just take you through these 6 components briefly and then touch on the issues that are happening in particular in the country. So we talk about the social order. The law obviously allows or stipulates who is allowed to use wildlife, to remove wildlife, to handle wildlife, anything involving wildlife. The law clearly stipulates who is supposed to do what are they supposed to do, where are they allowed to do so, how and when are they supposed to do so. And the law stipulates all these who, what, where, and when. That's when we're talking about. Failure to have this social order obviously leads into different catastrophes. For example, lack of order will lead to fights, will lead to land degradation, will contribute to change, will contribute to even confusion in the adjudication of cases when criminals are apprehended. The law is also there to legitimate authority of different organizations. So here in Zimbabwe, we have the Ministry of Environment being the umbrella or the mother body of different parastatals that regulate or that look after wildlife. So we have the wildlife, which is responsible for wildlife, and primarily animals and plants. And then we've got the Environmental Management Authority and the Forestry Commission, which are also legitimate authoritative bodies that have been outlined by the law. And the law has stipulated and enshrined powers. In particular, when you look into the different acts of these organizations, their authority or their powers as to what they're supposed to do are clearly defined in the very first sections of each and every act that govern them. Then, of course, the law provides solutions to conflict. I think the greatest challenge we have when we talk about conservation is the issue of fighting for the natural resources. There's a fight for land, water, and air. So they clearly stipulate which land is designated for which particular activity. For example, we have the Parks and Wildlife Management Act that has clearly stipulated certain areas to be sanctuaries, to be national parks, to be botanical gardens. That's the role of law in conservation. Then we have also different pieces of land that have been designated for mining, for agriculture, and whatnot. So you find that in the absence of law, those conflicts, they emerge. And even now when the law is there, I know in particular in Zimbabwe, usually the mining sector or the laws according to the mining sector usually take precedence over the laws under the Parks and Wildlife. That's why you find that mining normally happens in any land. And because of the way the Mining Act has been drafted, it has so much power that it supersedes, or it has been superseding any other piece of legislation, to the extent that wherever they feel or wherever there's potential to mine, that piece of legislation is so strong, and there are definitely complaints and lobbying as to, no, we need to do checks and balances in as far as the powers that are enshrined in the Mining Act. But in essence, the law is just there to clearly define and also to clearly resolve any potential conflict that happens between humans and wildlife. Where are the boundaries? Who is supposed to get in where, and where do humans? Then the law obviously is there to punish bad behavior. I think Zimbabwe has been doing so well in as far as punishing people, or offenders rather, for any criminal activity that involves specially protected animals like the pangolins, the rhino, the cheetah, the python. We've had very strong laws where most of the specially protected animals attract a mandatory sentence of 9 years without an option of a fine. Now, these are good laws where there are fines as compared to other countries where there's of a jail term or an option of a fine. Countries like Zambia, countries like Botswana, structured in that manner. So the law is there to punish bad behavior by giving mandatory sentences to people that commit offenses with regards to protected animals, and then also punish by offering penalties like community service, fines, and either both imprisonment and fines. And also, the law is there to incentivize behavior change through cohesion and sanctions. So we know, and we've talked about the law being there to promote good behavior. So, or being there to promote order. Now, not everybody likes the law, and generally some people have an appetite for breaking the law. And some other people are incentivized by the law. So yes, it punishes, but at the same time, it motivates certain people to behave in a certain manner, either through cohesion or either through sanctions. By sanctions, I'm just talking about additional penalties or additional penalties or additional sentences that are over and above a regular sentence that is passed in the magistrate court. For example, a person commits an offense to do with, suppose, poaching a rhino. The court will sentence them to 9 years, yes. If the carcass is found, there is an additional sanction where a person is supposed to compensate either parks or whichever appropriate authority a certain amount of money, $50,000 US, $20,000 US, depending on the animal. They're supposed to compensate that to the appropriate authority. So that sanction then also regulates the behavior of people. They'll know that not only will I just get a penalty to say pay 200 Zimbabwean dollars, but I'll be made to pay a compensation amount in US dollars to whoever would have lost the specific animal. So cohesive power of law shapes the options available to people by making some or just too costly for them to engage in that particular behavior. And then the obviously is there to promote the preservation of the environment for present and future generations. I think the most important thing, or the most important focus that everybody who's in conservation is aiming to do is to make sure that present and future generations benefit from these natural resources. So we have the Constitution in Section 73 that makes it clear that preservation of the environment for present and future generations is essential. And the only way to realize that preservation to promote conservation, the different activities that are being done, is to make sure that the law is there, and the law is there to support the different activities, and is also there to punish bad behavior for those that break or infringe the laws. Okay. Now, in Zimbabwe, we do have a lot of good laws that even some other countries do not have. I've talked about additional sanctions, like the issue of compensating a specific animal after having found guilty, or after having being sentenced to a particular sentence. There's an additional sanction where one has to pay. That is a good law. And then we also have certain offenses that attract a jail term with no option of a fine. That is a good law. And also, like what was highlighted, Zimbabwe falls in category 1 under CITES, meaning that it has it follows all the four national legislation requirements that are stipulated of a country which is conservation, or which is also trying to fight against illegal wildlife trade. But remember, when we talk about laws, not all laws are good. Laws are made by people. They also go through a process where people discuss, they agree, and then after that, people discuss the pros and cons, and then they finalize as to what needs to become law. So whatever is decided that is law becomes law, and definitely that should be followed, regardless of whether it's a good law or a bad law. So there are certain things, in my own personal view, I regard as bad, or I can classify as bad laws that are in Zimbabwe. Number one, the issue of special grants. We have seen an increase of, not an increase, but incidents of mining activities happening in national parks. We know that national parks are specifically designated for the preservation, conservation of wildlife. And we definitely don't expect to see activity taking there. But when you go to the Parks and Wildlife Act, you find that there is a certain section, just a few lines, that give discretion to the PRB to issue special grants that permit mining in parks areas. Now, from my perspective as a person that is really passionate and worried about the habitat of these animals, or the habitat of wildlife, and even the wild animals themselves, or in the plants and the animals themselves, I find that law to be bad because it gives discretion to the minister or the president to issue special grants to conduct mining in parks areas. So you'll find that there are certain mining activities that do happen in mining activity in wildlife designated areas. To me, that's a bad law. Yes, it is a law. It's what it is. But to me, I regard it as a bad law when I think of conservation and preservation for present and future generations. Then also the hunting of iconic species. To me, I regard that as a bad law. Yes, hunting is allowed. Hunting is legal in Zimbabwe. People are allowed to hunt lions, different species. I find the hunting of iconic species to be problematic, or to fall under a bad law, because when an animal is regarded iconic, it's not only now about what is right or wrong in Zimbabwe only, but it is now about the values and the perspective of the world at large. Because once an animal becomes an iconic species, I think it attracts so much attention, it attracts even revenue from different angles. And that's what makes it one of the things that. So hunting of iconic species is one of the things that I regard as bad laws. In Zimbabwe, we don't have any specific law that prohibits the hunting of iconic species. Then we also have laws that do not offer deterrent penalties. Yes, the laws that, yes, we have the laws that give penalties and say if you have a buffalo, a pangolin, and antelope, you're supposed to pay a fine of 10,000 Zimbabwean dollars. I think maybe in US dollars, most of our fines do not exceed 200 US, if I put them in US dollar value. So these fines are so deterrent that you find that the people or the offenders that are into poaching, they become serial poachers, they become repeat offenders, because 200 US dollars does not deter them from committing the offense. So in as much as the laws are there and they're giving fines, and also community service, which is one sentence that I find very, very disturbing. And and annoying, especially to people who own conservancies, that after pumping in so much money to pay the rangers to protect the animals, water, different resources are being pumped in, and then a person is sentenced to community service. They're made to go to work for a month in a certain school or in a certain hospital or in a certain clinic. That particular law or that particular sentence is not deterrent enough. And I think there's need for an upgrade to make it more serious and more deterrent to prevent people from committing offenses again. Same thing with construction in wetlands. There are certain areas in Harare, in Zimbabwe, world that have been clearly defined as wetlands. So once an area is defined as a wetland, you don't expect any urbanization to be taking place or any other activity to be taking place in a wetland. But when you go to the act, you find that there's also that is given to the authority, to the authority for them to say, when they declare this area not to be a wetland, then a person can construct or can engage in urbanization or whatever activity. So that again is problematic, and that again I regard it as a bad law. I prefer, or I lobby and advocate for wetlands to remain wetlands and not to give the discretion to someone to then say, yes, it's a wetland, or no, it's not a wetland. Because there are certain areas that I grew up knowing that there were wetlands for the past 20 years or so. But right now I find people building beautiful homes there, people now, sorts of human activity, urbanization going on. So that discretion now, depending on way of authority, is or might be subject to abuse, and then to me falls under a bad law. And then also discretion to what I've been saying. There's certain provisions that there's discretion to different authorities that are not necessarily in the best interest of the habitat in general, or that are not in the best interest of wildlife. So I'm somebody who's really discretionary powers and believe in just a law stipulating that this is a weapon, should not be touched. This is an iconic species, it should not be touched. This is a national park, should not be mined, and should not be mined, things like that. I've highlighted the bad laws, but we also have weak laws. By weak laws, I'm referring to the laws that are currently in existence, but they're not the best. They are a little bit of review, they desire a little bit of amendment for them to suit our current environment and to suit what is currently going on in as far as climate change is concerned, in as far as upgrade of the different poaching skills and intelligence that is being used by poaching to kill wildlife. So we have the definition of wildlife in the Parks and Wildlife Act. It is not exhaustive. They should be desired in that definition. A simple thing like a fish is excluded definition of wildlife. Our wildlife is not inclusive of both fauna and flora. It focuses more on the animals more than it focuses on flora. And then also find that when we talk about the definition of wildlife, our wildlife definition in the Parks and Wildlife Act talks about wildlife being animals that are indigenous to Zimbabwe. Now that presents a problem, especially when we get into court, and we've encountered quite a number of cases where, for example, I'll give the monkeys case. The monkeys case that happened sometime, should be last year or in 2019, I think, where there were monkeys that were being transported from DRC. There was a debate, a technical debate as to these monkeys are not exotic to Zimbabwe. And the definition defines wildlife as animals that are indigenous to Zimbabwe. So you find that when you get into court, instead of fighting illegal wildlife trade, fighting wildlife trafficking, you now go to the basic things or to the technical things of talking and trying to define what wildlife is. So we ended up using ancillary legislation like the Immigrations, the Customs Act, to try and arrest those people and to try and make sure that those people are arrested, because the Parks and Wildlife Act was limping in as far as the definition was concerned and any animals that come in the country. Then we have no criminal provisions for wildlife trafficking. Wildlife trafficking has become a problem and is a problem, but our laws haven't been updated to specifically recognize wildlife trafficking to have a specific offense. What we do is to rely on other pieces of legislation, Customs Act, Immigration Act, Animal Health Act, when one is found trying to smuggle animals from one country to the other, because our act does not have specific criminal provisions on that. And then we also have the act limping in that not all animals are regulated, or not all animals are part of the act. One example is a case where we were dealing with an animal called an abalone. The animal was not listed on the list of animals. So once there's a loophole, of course, you can't list all of them, but at least once we find out that an animal is missing, there's need to quickly amend or to quickly edit and add in that animal. Because when that animal is not there and that case goes to a police officer, a prosecutor who is not passionate or who does not understand the value of animals and what should be done, it then might create problem, and it might even lead to bad charging decisions, or it might lead to be prosecuted, because the person will be saying this animal is not listed as part of a wild animal in the country. Then also we have numerous wildlife legal instruments. We have more than 10 different instruments that regulate the use, possession, the removal, the control of wildlife in Zimbabwe. Now, because the patience of trying to know which particular statutory instrument to use for which particular animal is not there for everyone. And also the knowledge to know that, okay, this is a case involving an ivory from an elephant. One needs to use the statutory instrument and not the main piece of legislation. So having so many different pieces of legislation creates confusion, creates frustration in coming up with prosecution decisions, and also even in sentencing. So the recommendation that we are lobbying and that we are pushing for is to have one consolidated act which encompasses everything in one book, so that at least the work of charging and prosecuting and sentencing wildlife cases becomes smooth and easy. So as I mentioned earlier, that I'm the founder of a non-governmental organization called Speak Out for Animals. What we've tried to do as animal lawyers is to engage in case monitoring. By case monitoring, we work hand in glove with the police and also private investigating officers who do wildlife cases. When they inform us, we work hand in glove with them to advise them on the particular charges that they should prefer. And then we assist the prosecution in drafting the charges, or we just advise them which particular charge is appropriate for which particular sentence. And then we also help in pushing for stringent sentences to the magistrates. That's when we do case monitoring. And then we're also involved in a lot of trainings. We've trained magistrates, prosecutors, police, investigating officers on wildlife law, because we realized that not everybody is exposed to this field of law. They need to know what the law says and how to manage the cases as they work. We're also involved in advocacy and lobbying, like what I'm telling you right now, that when we feel or when we see that this is a bad law or this is potential to be improved or to be changed, we go and we lobby and we say, please amend the law, please review the Parks and Wildlife Act, please consolidate so that they become efficient and it becomes easy for people to do their work. We're involved with student education. We introduced wildlife law as a formal module in the law school, at a law school called Great Zimbabwe University, where wildlife law is now a formal subject that law students can learn before they graduate. As a former prosecutor myself, one of the challenges that I faced was, I still remember trying a case on ivory and pangolin. I had not known about ivory, I wasn't even exposed to wildlife laws, but I was expected to prosecute diligently and do my best, yet I wasn't exposed. So I found it very important to teach the future magistrates, politicians, legislators, drafters on wildlife law before they get into the field. And then also we're involved in literature development. We've developed what we call a guide for prosecuting and investigating on investigators on case building. This is just a summary of almost all wildlife offenses that we have in Zimbabwe and the sentences that one should be given, so that it is easy for the prosecutors, police, investigating officers, magistrates, and judges to refer to. And then we have a wildlife legal guide, which is a very short, a small booklet where anybody who's not really a legal person, any layman can just read and understand how the law works, the do's and the don'ts, and the penalties that one might encounter or one might face if they commit a wildlife offense. Then we've also done a baseline survey of wildlife crime court cases in Kazan region from 2015 to 2018. Right now, we are in the process of also coming up with a wildlife crime report for wildlife cases from 2018 to 2021. If all goes well, that report should be published in December, or I think maybe early, depending on how the analysis and also these lockdowns go. But there will be a wildlife report where one can quickly go and see what are the prevalent offenses, who are the common offenders, which nationality, which animals are being targeted the most, which sentences are being given to the offenders. That's what that report is going to be all about. And then we also have an animal law statute book and a wildlife law statute book that consolidates all the wildlife laws that we have in our country. Like I mentioned, we have a minimum of 10 of them. So what we did was to just consolidate all the laws in that book so that it becomes a one-stop shop for anyone who's interested in wildlife law. Then finally, the recommendations that I give, and some of them I've talked about them, is the of legislation. And also, I also recommend having a dedicated environmental court. I feel this will be of great use, and it's also a benefit, especially to those that will be handling wildlife cases or cases to do with plants or cases to do with forests or anything to do with the environment. At least if we have dedicated judges, magistrates, prosecutors, police that are handling these cases, we'll find that trials will move faster. The sentences that are given there I'm sure they'll definitely be different from the ones that are given in the general courts because of that greater appreciation and prioritization of environmental cases or wildlife cases. And then capacity building is something that needs to continuously go on and on, because single time we have different job rotations. Today you train 20 magistrates in one region. Next, after 6 months, there's a whole new group in that same region. Those ones are no longer dealing with wildlife cases. And also the same thing with police and the same thing with other departments. So that continuous capacity building, where we're training in law enforcement and judiciary on wildlife law, how to prosecute, appropriate sentences, and most importantly, the value of wildlife, I'm sure that will definitely improve the situation. And then formal laws, yes, we've started educating at one law school, and we hope the other 2 law schools in the country will also take up wildlife law as a formal module, so that at least everybody who graduates from law school had an opportunity about wildlife law, the value of wildlife, and how to with regards to wildlife. And then lastly, the review of wildlife laws. This has been ongoing. I know National Parks has been, and the ministry has been spearheading this process. And we hope that the conclusion of the review will be soon, so that at least we improve the way and the manner in which cases are being handled in court. So this is primarily the work that we do, and the recommendations that we give in as far as law and conservation is concerned. The work that we do emanated from observing that there's a gap in as far as knowledge of wildlife law is. There's a gap, there's a knowledge gap in as far as appreciating laws in the country. That's why we're passionate about training, and we're passionate about education. And also we realize that there's frustration from conservancies, police, investigators, who pump in a lot of financial and human capital protecting wildlife, but then get disappointed when they go to court. So I think in essence, what I can say is that, yes, we can do a lot of anti-poaching activities. Yes, we can pump in a lot of effort and a lot of money on the ground, but at the end of the day, it also goes to the judiciary and goes to the court to support that effort, to support the conservation work, in order for us to preserve our animals, both present and future generations. So that's it from me, and for listening.
Thank you so much, Eva. That was brilliant. We've had a very vibrant conversation and set of questions going on in the chat. So I invite you to take a look at that if you haven't read it already. And anyone who does have a question related to, you don't have to worry about it ever. I'll bring the questions to you, but anybody who does have a question or a comment, please go ahead and pop that into the chat. You can stop sharing if you want, Eva, and then we can see everyone's faces. So just to start with, I mean, where does one find, is there, apart from your documents, which I'd also like to know, where can we find your documents? For people that really want to read the detail of all of these different laws, I know for me, I can't keep up with all the SIs that are constantly coming through. Is there a centralized place where one can access all of the up-to-date legislation that relates to wildlife?
To be honest, I'm not sure of any centralized place where one can find this, but of course, if you go to government printers where they have all the laws and not wildlife in particular, you'll get those. But other than that, I do not know of any other resource where you can just go on that one particular place and get that. So what we've tried to do is to put the laws in the book, like what I've said, and also on our website. So if you go on www.speakoutforanimals.org, there's a tab under legislation. You should be able to access the book, and you should be also able to access the different SIs and also the different laws that currently.
Okay, brilliant.
Yeah.
Perfect. So that's speakoutforanimals.org.
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm putting that into the chat for people. Okay, excellent. There was a question around how effective punitive fines and penalties are. And that was a question from Edward. And certainly I know there has been some pushback in Kenya where there is sentences of something like 25 years to life for elephant poaching. And what they've found is that actually, in some cases, removes the likelihood of conviction, because the burden of proof on the investigators is so high, because judges are sort of saying, gosh, if we're going to put somebody away for life, we better be sure that it's that's what happened. Is that something that you've come across as an issue with regard to these punitive penalties, fines, and sentences?
Yeah, I think the law or magistrates will always try to not to incarcerate somebody. That's right. The starting point. That's the fines, the community service, and then we have jail sentences. But then with specially protected animals, there is no option of a fine, there's no option of community service. We just go straight to the mandatory sentences.
Right.
Our laws specifically say is that when one is found guilty of a specially protected animal like a pangolin rhino, you're given an opportunity to give what we call special circumstances. Do you have any special reason why you committed this particular offense? And because this offense attracts a 9-year jail term. So people then have any special reason. Like, for example, I know one case that I dealt with back then, like 4 years ago when I was a prosecutor. That guy mentioned that he had inherited the ivory pieces from his grandma, who was into traditional healing and stuff like that, and also care. That was his defense. That is not a common excuse that you can come and say your grandmother was a traditional healer, or I can come and say I was a traditional healer, because he was made to bring evidence to show whether that was true. So if you've got a very special reason why you committed the offense, then you can be, he was given 3 years. He was sentenced to 3 years instead of 9 years. Because in essence, he has committed the offense. But now we look into the mitigating factors to say, surely it's not fair to take someone to jail for 9 years who did not know, yet ignorance is not an excuse, but who got exposed to these things. Because now they were asking him that, so when you saw these things, what did you do? And this person, and then he was also asked, do you not know that you were supposed to declare things at the national parks, to just tell them or mention? That's when, you know, that sentence got lower until 3 years. So I think for our country, that's what currently goes on. Mandatory sentence, and then you give special circumstances.
Okay, but there isn't, I mean, is there a higher requirement in terms of the quality of the evidence for the investigators, because the sentence is higher and the sentence is mandatory, whereby the magistrate is wanting to be sure that the offense was committed?
To be honest, I'm not privy of any high standard other than what is generally accepted for any other cause. You are supposed to, I mean, prosecutors, investigators are supposed to bring evidence and convince the court beyond a reasonable doubt that this person committed an offense. But I think one thing that I would want to mention is the different laws with other laws, which also is problematic. In Zimbabwe, the Parks and Wildlife Act gives burden to the accused person to prove that they were offense.
Ah, I see.
Not the police officer to prove that I was committing. I'm the one who's supposed to prove that, no, I wasn't hunting. I wasn't removing this animal. I wasn't trafficking, which is problematic because all other offenses and even the Constitution places the burden on the state to prove that the person committed an offense. So now there's that contradiction and conflict between the Constitution and the Parks and Wildlife Act, because based on the accused person.
Okay, so that brings another question from Edward Mutandwa from, I think, from the University of Zimbabwe, who was very active, which is a question about the harmonization of our wildlife laws to the Constitution. And where is that process at the moment?
One thing that I know of is that the issue of reviewing an amendment has been pushed by so many different actors for a very long time. And the good thing is, as far as I remember, the Parks and Wildlife Authority had done consultative meetings, and they were on their final stage. But I don't work for Parks, so I wouldn't be the best person to comment on the actual stage they are. But one thing I know is that they've done 2 consultative meetings with regards to what should be changed and what not, which is great progress. So now we wait for next steps. I'm not sure when Parks would be the best to inform us, but at least reasonable action has been done.
Okay, now that's great. If anyone's from Parks is on the meeting, I know Nobasutu has had a lot of connectivity problems, but if anyone else from Parks is on the meeting and knows, please let us know. I'm happy to give you the floor. Okay, I want to give the floor to Greg to speak to his question around what are the steps to achieving speeding fines for wildlife areas, because mortality on roads is a major issue. Greg, if you could take the floor, please.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, just to set the scene, on the Big Falls to Kazagula Road, 4,000 to 8,000 vertebrates are killed every year by speeding traffic. For the last 7 years, the painted dog has been wiped out. Every pack of painted dogs has been wiped out within 18 months. So that classifies the species as functionally extirpated. We are currently working, obviously, with Parks and police on mitigating and solutions. But one of the solutions that's come up very regularly is we need a special schedule of fines for wildlife areas to make it meaningful when somebody hits an animal and it's designated due to speeding. Because at the moment, as it was mentioned before, if someone's going to get a $10 ticket for speeding in a wildlife area, but if like Botswana, they got a $600 US fine, like in Chobe, everyone drives like little saints. Nobody speeds in Chobe because they apply the law. And that also partly answers the question about punitive fines. Those punitive fines in Chobe make sure that everybody does 80 or 60, because if you're not sure your speedometer is working, you're not going to get slammed. And, but how, it was actually ZRP that said to us, Greg, we need special schedule of fines. How would we start that process, or who would be our voice to make some of that thing? And obviously not just wildlife traffic accidents. There are many of us in the conservation field saying we need a law, and there currently isn't one that we can find. Over to you.
Great question, Eva. Thanks. Eva, I don't know if you have any ideas or if that's come up in your work to date.
Yes, the Zimbabwe Parks and Wildlife Management Authority that has the authority and the power to push for any schedule of fines, or to come up with any schedule of fines and then submit it to the ministry for approval. So I think that's the place to go with any concern when we're not happy with the current fines or with the current schedules, because they are the ones that submit to the ministry to say, please, can we review this? The same way we have so many different SIs and even the schedules, SI 56 and 57, it emanated from Parks and Wildlife. So the authority, in particular, the legal department, is the one that is supposed to assist with coming up with those specific fines.
Even a fine that would be sort of like, so the Kazangula Road, for example, is a national road. It just happens to pass through safari areas that are under parks management. So you can see the sort of overlap of different authorities there.
Yes, I think yes, there's an overlap, but I think at the end of the day, it goes to the purpose and the intention of why we want to have those fines. That's why we are supposed to go to Zimpax, and then Zimpax will then do those consultative meetings and invite all those key stakeholders, be it the roads, Minister of Roads, Minister of whatever, and then we then sit down, even as private stakeholders, we then sit down and come up with a solution. So the intent, the purpose is the one that directs us to Zimpax.
Absolutely. So I'm just trying to see, Jamil, are you still on the call? If so, I'd love for you to take the floor and just maybe, give us your thoughts regarding the harmonization, not only across different natural resource sectors, but also, as we've been speaking about here, it's like across sort of all of our sectors in Zimbabwe. But I'm not sure if Jamil is still on the call. You may have had to drop off. Okay, that's fine. Edward, you had so many comments and questions. I'm trying to get different faces to speak. Edward, would you like to take the floor and either speak to your question around the flexibility of laws in changing circumstances, or around iconic species, iconic individuals, or indeed any of your other questions, of which there were many? He doesn't have voice. Sorry. Okay, well, let's deal with the iconic individuals question. I think this is something that's come up very many times. You were referring to iconic species, Eva, and I was just wondering, do you mean individuals? So rather than sort of banning the hunting of all elephants, but rather, making sure that elephants that have particular significance in the tourism industry or as research animals, is that what you were speaking about?
Yeah, my referral to iconic species, I think obviously up with an act to define which one is an iconic species and whatnot. I think that's the starting point, because definition of the iconic species will vary and will, but I was making a quick reference to research animals, or to, those outstanding animals. It might not be research, but those outstanding animals that people travel to see, that people can relate with. Either for tourism, either for whatnot. Those particular animals, I'm sure those that are on the ground can pick them out and can be defined that these are iconic. Let's not hunt them, or let's protect them, because the effect it does when those animals are hunted, it now becomes the issue of a fight and a battle of morality and legality. It's legal to hunt in Zim, but morally, outside, it's morally wrong. So instead of firefighting, there's need to have those specific laws that just protect certain species, because the effect and the impact of killing Cecil the lion doesn't then not affect an individual person. It then affects the country, it affects tourism, it affects so many things. So that's where I'm coming from.
Absolutely. Okay, Power, you were raising your hand. Did you have something to contribute here? And then I'm going to go on to Joe. Power, do you want to take the floor?
Yes, thank you, Diane. Thank you, Eva, for the presentation. I want to speak about the iconic individuals, where Eva is referring to them as iconic species. Half a time these are not communicated to everyone when a research is going on. Coming to the example of Cecil the lion, people only came to know about Cecil when he was hunted. But during the process, I don't know how many years the research was going on. Nobody knew, nobody was aware of such a name, I mean, in animals. So while at least we appreciate that there is no law that prohibits hunting and shooting of iconic individuals, my question would be then, how best can we move forward in protecting those? I know people who do research do not normally want to be known they are doing this and that, save for a few. I will cite an example here. In Chisarira National Park, we have alert who are doing lion research and elephant research. So each time they put a collar on an animal, they communicate, and we communicate to hunters surrounding us to say, there are some collared animals here. If you find them, please spare them until the research is over. That way, I think we'll get to protect those iconic individuals. But if there's no communication, then it's more to do with ethics than law, because there is no law that prohibits hunting of those. So my question to Eve is, how then can we move forward in putting it down as a law? Because as long as it is not law, it can be contested in a court of law. How then can we put it as a law so that we protect those iconic individuals? Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Power. I think this speaks to the, the issues. One is, what is the law that we all have to follow? And the other is, what is our community of practice as conservationists, whether it's across the wildlife management, the tourism, photographic, the hunting. Do we have a community of practice where, we're all on the same page and pulling in the same direction, even if we have different ways of going there? And I'm not sure that we do at the moment. So hopefully things like SCB and also Conservation Professionals Association of Zimbabwe, and the ongoing consultations that ZimParks continues to do can be a place. But I think there's kind of lots of soft work that needs to happen as a community, in addition to all of the legal framework that needs to happen. I'm going to go next to, what did I say, to Joe Craig. Joe, do you want to take the floor, or shall I just ask your question? Take the floor. Brilliant.
Well, thanks so much for the lecture. It's exciting to be able to make one. This first one I've been able to attend in real time. Eva, I would like to know your thoughts on the use of traditional courts on a village level. Obviously, there are, the more severe cases it wouldn't work for, but do you think this strengthens the mitigation process? Do you think it weakens it? And obviously it depends. Anyway, I'm rambling. To you.
All right. Thank you so much. So responding to Joe, I think traditional courts are a useful resource to use, because it deals with communities and it deals with the animals. It deals with the situation that is on the ground. And with traditional courts, we are able to quickly get responses or quickly get solutions to the problem that we'll be facing. However, I'm sure, and obviously these traditional courts have jurisdictions and have limitations to say they can preside over cases to do with bushbacks or hair, or, they have a jurisdiction that they can deal with. And then there's certain cases that traditional courts clearly do not and should not handle, that they should take to the upper courts, to the magistrate courts or to the high court or whatever. But I think traditional courts, they're important, mostly because they're on the ground, they're efficient, they're fast in trying to resolve conflict, in trying to send a message to the community, or in trying to resolve the human-wildlife conflict that is happening. So it is a resource that people can resort to, but it should always operate within its jurisdiction, within its powers, not to then, preside over pangolin or rhino cases there. They should always just deal with what is within their power, and the rest should just go to the magistrate court. Responding to power, yes, you're right that the iconic species, they're not known, but my answer is also similar to that. To the other one that I've responded to, saying the legal department in Parks and Wildlife is the department that should assist us to draft and come up with this iconic species statutory instrument. They should come up with a schedule of fines, thing that we need or that we want. We should get it, or we should start from the Parks and Wildlife. Then they guide us accordingly. They have the consultations, take it to the Attorney General, then we have a statutory instrument. Or even still, they can even integrate it in the review process, in the wildlife legislation review process that they're currently doing, if there's still time. We don't have another statutory instrument, but it then is integrated in the final act that is coming soon.
Brilliant, thank you. Merlin, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Eva, for always a very good concept and intriguing topic. I've got a lot of questions for you, but today I'll ask, what is your advice for upcoming conservationists and conservation scientists who want to take a career path into wildlife law and maybe policy making, seeing as not everybody's a researcher or inclined to further their career that way? And essentially, I'm asking, how do you as a law firm or group interface with conservation scientists who have the research, the facts, the feet on the ground? How does your work interface with us practically? Because I could be sitting here doing research that has a lot of like remote sensing about what is happening on the ground. I could have a lot of information about illegal things that are happening on the ground in Zimbabwe, but I wouldn't know how to interface with you. So if you could shed some light on how to cross without having to do a law degree and be part of building on that, but from a scientist's perspective. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. So currently, as Speak Out for Animals, we have a group of volunteers who are ecologists, biologists, environmental scientists, veterinary scientists, the scientists, people from your end that we work with on voluntary basis. Why? Because we realized that we can't talk about the law from the science. If we want to be successful in as far as conservation is concerned, we need to know the facts. And we do not know anything, we can't research forward. So what we did is to come up with a list of volunteers that we quickly go to and ask to say, can you tell us about the lion species populations, genetic, what have you? Then when we get that information, we then integrate it with the legal part. Otherwise, we can't, and we don't work in isolation of the science. That's how we've been operating. And as far as formal education is concerned, we only managed to have a breakthrough with Great Zimbabwe Law School. But then we've had also Chinoda University, which offers wildlife degree programs or ecology programs, approach us to say, why are you introducing that module as part of our curriculum? Because at the end of the day, we are the ones sitting in offices and making the decisions and influencing the decisions. We are just doing baby steps, and we hope as time goes on and as interest generates, we'll be able to be accepted in the universities to offer that module. But as of now, I could only think of where I came from as a lawyer for easy. That's the correct direction, to just offer the course to scientists as well, so that we are at a fair playing ground when we get in.
That's great. That answers my question. I wanted to know about introducing your module into the natural resource programs at universities, because I think in Zimbabwe, it's really important that our ecologists are trained to understand the policy framework and also how they have influence over it. So that's fantastic. Okay, we are going to take 4 more questions and then we're going to close. So please make them short. Otherwise, I'm going to have to drop some of them. So next is Diana.
All right. Hello, everyone. Sorry, I joined in late. Hope I didn't miss much.
Hi.
Hi. So I just wanted to comment. So I'm with PAX. What we've been saying, unfortunately, I'm not from the investigation side, but I remember attending one of the stakeholder consultations, and what we're talking about is there's serious need for us to consider having a wildlife court, because we see that most of the issues that we have is because our courts do not have an appreciation of wildlife, the value of wildlife, and the efforts and costs that go into protecting them. For example, I think the presenter initially was talking about smaller animals that are not key species, that don't have a mandatory sentence. So I know in as much as some of them have a value attached to them, most of them don't. So you see the situation where you catch someone maybe with the snare potters of they've killed an impala, for example. It does have a value that's there, but when people are being fined, you see that the fine that is given to a potter that's cost after all these resources go into play, it's not deterrent enough. So I think that's one of the issues that we're having with our laws and our conservation as well, because one side is doing all this effort catching the culprits, trying to prevent poaching, but in the end, we go back to where we started from, because when we go to the courts now, which is the final stage, nothing really happens to these people, and they're given maybe a fine of $100 or even $20 in some instances. And that's in RTGS. We all know it doesn't account to much. So it's not deterrent enough. So, and maybe just a quick comment on the iconic animals. I do agree there is need to have.
We lost you, Diana. She's still on, but she seems to have disappeared. We'll come back if she can. It's a question from Max Moore. He can't reach the voice, but he's asking, I think what he's asking is why the courts can't have more discretion to make more punitive fines than what is in than what's in the law. So linked to what Diana was just speaking about.
The laws are already set.
So the maximums are set.
Yeah, if it's 9 years for a first, it's 9 years. If it's 11 for a second time offender, it's 11. So whichever discretionary that they're supposed to exercise, it can only say as much.
Right.
So if a level 6 fine is $30 even if they wanted to give you $200, they are bound, their hands are tied, which is why we need to lobby through PACs to say, no, we can't have these fines either in our local currency, which the value changes so fast because of inflation, right? Or to just say, why not give this amount of money, a $1,000 fine or whatnot. If we don't start there and if we don't change the laws from that angle, no matter how much we want the courts to, they are bound by what the law already stipulates. So that's where the issue is.
So just a follow-up question to that, as an individual citizen or a researcher, what is the best way to lobby for that? Like, what is the mechanism to be a voice in that lobbying?
As a non-government organization, what we've done, I'll give an example of the wild dog or the painted dog. What we did is the painted dog had interest and has been pushing on upgrading the painted dog into a specially protected animal. And also from our own perspective and our interest, we felt it's a noble cause to upgrade it to a specially protected animal. So we worked hand in glove with the painted dogs. They gave us the scientific info, like what I was talking to you, because we don't know anything. They give us
Right.
the scientific information, and then we combined the information we have, we heard, then submitted it to Zimpax. And then from Zimpax, they had their consultative meetings and whatnot, submitted it to ministry. From ministry, they submitted to the Attorney General's office, from the Attorney General's office back to the ministry, and then a statutory instrument on wild dog, of elevating the wild dog from a problem animal to a specially protected animal, came into place. So I
It's
think
that combination. It's that combination between science and the legal
Science and the law.
understanding. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Okay, no, brilliant.
That's how
Okay.
we did it from our end,
Great.
giving an example of the painted dog. So I wouldn't know of how best to lobby, but obviously, if, for example, if we want to have the Iconic Species Act, for example, it's a matter of mobilizing people or conservancies with the same interest and having the same voice. We go people with the idea. Then we go with it to parks and push parks for them to push on our behalf. Then
Right.
when they push on our behalf, that's how we win. So I think it's a matter of coming up together with one voice, with the same interest and same objective, and then combine the legal aspect and the scientific aspect, and then we along with parks or go to the ministry, because it's also possible to just go directly to the ministry. Is the one that has the ultimate power. But it's always good to go through parks, because they are the ones that are the primary custodians and will make the process easier rather than up, down, up, That's my suggestion.
Great. Okay, we're going to go to Richard, and then if there's time, Tim will come to you. Otherwise, we'll close. But Richard, if you can make it quick, you can take the floor.
Thanks, Eva. The greatest threat, I think, in the valley is this deforestation due to tobacco wood cutting for tobacco barns. The contradiction for me is if you chop charcoal, you go to the slammer. If you chop a tree and put it in the barns, you go and collect your money from some multinational tobacco company, who I would hold accountable for this devastation rather than the people on the ground. Is there a way, and who should be doing it, of taking these multinational tobacco companies to task or to court, or suing them for effectively taking these massive amounts of forest for free, burning it and taking the tobacco out the country? Any initial comments?
Great question.
No, the authority, primarily EMA, the Environmental Management Authority, has the mandate to ensure that they protect the forest and they protect the environment. So they have the authority to take those companies and take those individuals to court. And we also have non-government organizations like Zela. I don't know what Zela stands for, but Zela is one organization that is very active in as far as litigation and protecting the environment in that context. Speak Out for Animals, yes, but we are not, we haven't done any litigation case in that context. But I think environmental organizations that are keen in protecting, that are legal, I know Zela and ourselves can do that. But Emma is the one that is supposed to be on the forefront to file cases against those corporations.
Okay, thanks very much.
I can see how it's incredibly complicated when you have a bunch of small scale outgrowers. Very complicated, but definitely something. Okay, I think we want to close now. Tim, is your question very quick?
Don't worry, we can close.
Okay, cool. Okay, what we'd love to do is I'll just quickly share my screen, because we're very happy to share with you who our next speakers are. So our next, we don't have the exact dates yet, are Itai Tendai Penyu from Parks, who's going to speak about freshwater conservation, which is really exciting. I think that's often ignored. And Jonathan Timberlake is going to speak about plant conservation, another ignored topic. So if you are not already part of our mailing list, please sign up. You can see the link there, and maybe someone can put it into the chat, and we'll make sure that we add you to our mailing list. These seminars happen about once every month when we can, so that's great. And again, I'd like to remind you about the upcoming ICCB, which will be online, as well as our blog series. Please, if you do have a topic for a blog, please contact Tim. Okay, then to close, if we can all put on our videos, we'd love to grab a screenshot. This has just been such a great talk and wonderful interaction. So Richard's walking through his house. We've got, MX, you've joined us. I'm sorry.
Wow, looking smart,
our
MX.
other committee member is here. Hi, MX, looking very smart.
I'm ready for the screenshot. So
okay, ready?
Can you
so
guys
let's all wave to Tim.
2, 3.
2.
Got you.
Got it?
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Brilliant. There was wonderful questions. There's one about human-wildlife conflict, but we're out of time. So I think this has just been fantastic. Thank you so much, Eva, for being our speaker today. We really enjoyed it. And have I missed anything, committee members? No? All good. Great. Thank you so much. And we look forward to having you join us at our next seminar. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Diane.
Thanks all.